Terri Weems, President of Detroit Employment Solutions Corporation, and I would like to welcome you to today's panel discussion regarding the impact of the pandemic on employers. This panel discussion is being recorded and made available for those who were not able to attend today. Before we begin our discussion, let me introduce our panel members. Wendy Block is the Vice President of Business Advocacy and Member Engagement for the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. Wendy joined the Chamber in 2004. As the Vice President of Business Advocacy and Member Engagement, Wendy is responsible for developing and advancing legislative and regulatory proposals and agendas representing the Chamber members' interests on a wide range of issues, including healthcare, legal reform, workforce development, and employment law. She also manages the Chamber members' engagement activities, including the Chamber's signature events and webinar and training programs. Wendy has worked in and around Lansing's political circles for 2 decades. Before joining the Chamber, Wendy served as policy advisor for the Michigan House of Representatives, covering health insurance, financial services, and education issues. She also held other policy-related positions in the Michigan House and Senate. Wendy holds a bachelor's degree from Loyola University in Chicago. She has been identified in MERS EPIC MRA Insiders as one of Lansing's most effective single-issue lobbyists in 2013. President and CEO of the Michigan Retailers Association and serves in the same capacity for Michigan Retailers Services and Retailers Insurance Company. The Michigan Society of Association Executives named him as a rising leader among state associations. He joined Michigan Retailers in August 2011 as Vice President and General Counsel. He expanded his responsibilities to include oversight of the association's legislative advocacy program in February 2012 and overall operations in September of 2013. His legislative accomplishments include playing a key role in passage of the Organized Retail Crime Act, and he was appointed by Governor Rick Snyder to the Organized Retail Crime Advisory Board. Prior to joining Michigan Retailers, he was litigator in the Dykema Gossett law firm's Bloomfield Hills office. He is magna cum laude graduate of the University of Toledo School of Law, where he was articles editor for the Law Review and a graduate of Denison University. Delaney McKinley is the Vice President of Membership, Marketing, and Events for the Michigan Manufacturing Association. As the head of MMA's Membership, Marketing, Events Department, Delaney leverages a diverse set of skills to deliver outstanding value to the organization's broad membership. She leads the organization's communication strategy with various stakeholders and directs member recruitment, retention, and engagement programs. Delaney joined MMA in 2011 as part of the government affairs representing Michigan's manufacturing community on human resources and human resource policy matters. She later gained responsibility for the association's membership initiatives as Senior Director of Government Affairs and Membership. She previously worked in the Michigan legislature and then served as Manager of Government and Public Relations for Jackson National Life, where she lobbied on behalf of the company on state and federal efforts. More recently, Delaney served as Senior Vice President of the Grants Consulting Group, an advocacy firm specializing in government and public relations consulting for clients at the international, federal, state, and local levels. John Melcher is the Chief Operating Officer at Crystal Mountain Resort in Thompsonville, Michigan. John joined Crystal Mountain, a family-owned four-season resort located 28 miles southwest of Traverse City, in 2017. John brings 25 years of treasury management and commercial lending experience from Fifth Third Bank and has an extensive background in management, commercial banking, and sales. He also serves as a reserve lieutenant with the Traverse City Police Department, is a member of the National Ski Patrol, serves on the board of directors for the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, and is a member of the Best Benzie County Employment Advisory Council. He earned a bachelor's degree from Denison University and a master's of business association administration from the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. Today's discussion is part of a series of panels taking place throughout April in recognition of Michigan Works Association Workforce Advocacy Month. We hope to bring you an informative and spirited discussion today. Let's start today's discussion with a couple of questions for Wendy Block, Vice President of Business Advocacy and Member Engagement for the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. Wendy, this past year has been tough on everyone, but especially tough on Michigan businesses. Last month, the Michigan Chamber created the Reopen Michigan Safely Coalition, asking the governor to allow a full reopening of Michigan businesses before we lose more jobs. Please tell us more about the coalition and how organizations can get involved and if they're interested.
Yeah, so thank you. And thank you for the nice introduction, as well as the opportunity to be here this morning. So the Michigan Chamber has formed what's called the Reopen Michigan Safely campaign. And that campaign is really focused on trying to reopen Michigan businesses safely. Since last year around this time, when we were all told to pack up our offices and we were going to go home for a few weeks, Michigan offices have largely been closed. And that has to do with some orders that have been put in place by the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or MIOSHA. And, we talk a lot about these MDHHS epidemic orders that, put restrictions on restaurants and retailers and otherwise. But you also have a layer of restrictions that have been put on employers more generally, focused on the workplace. And Michigan is one of the only state that we can find in the entire nation that has a ban on in-person work, on office work. And we believe that it is time for Michigan employers to be able to put the safety protocols in place and to be able to reopen their office settings. We know that the ban on office work is having a really severe impact on many of our employees because they're facing isolation in their homes. I don't know about you, but I feel like every day is kind of Groundhog Day. I wake up, I walk to a different room. At the end of the day, I walk downstairs. And it's creating strain and stress on our businesses that rely on office workers, the downtowns, the cities that have restaurants that are relying on people coming into businesses every day and then going out for lunch. And is having an impact, therefore, on our cities in terms of the revenue that they're receiving. It may be parking revenue and other things. So we're focused on trying to lift those restrictions, loosen those restrictions before things get worse and these businesses are ultimately destroyed further, and just get back to a situation where we can collaborate and innovate and actually meet with each other in person. So that campaign is reopenmichigansafely.com. That's the website. We have over 50 organizations that are a part of this effort and really just focus on that safety piece, of course, but getting back to being able to meet together and to work together moving forward.
Thank you so much for that. Wendy, prior to the pandemic, businesses across the state were struggling to find skilled workers to fill critical jobs and grow their businesses. The pandemic has exacerbated that problem, and there's an even deeper critical need for training and workforce readiness. What policy efforts is the Chamber undertaking to address this issue?
Yeah, so I think other panelists can speak to this as well. Probably John Melcher at Crystal Mountain, just in terms of the struggles that they may be having with seasonal workers and such. But this is a huge pain point for employers. It's something that we are hearing about going into the pandemic, and the problems have just become exponentially worse during the pandemic. And now as we start to kind of crawl our way out of it. There's a lot of different factors at work here. So one of the biggest struggles is that many employers, those employers that are paying, a minimum wage or even upwards of $15 or more an hour, are in a situation where they are, if someone was laid off, they're competing with these enhanced unemployment benefits that have come and layered on top of the state unemployment benefits that are available. Today, if you're on unemployment, you can earn the equivalent of about $35,000 a year, just under that. And so that becomes a real struggle in terms of trying to get someone to walk away from unemployment, where they maybe could make more staying home than they can working. And so that has been a real pain point and struggle for Michigan employers. Another thing that we're talking to the Michigan Works agencies about is the pause on work search and work registration. So normally when someone is unemployed, the state requires people to actively look for work. So to qualify for unemployment benefits, you have to be unemployed due to no fault of your own and to be available for and actively seeking work. the state is now relying on an obscure administrative rule to put those processes on ice, on pause. And so if you're unemployed today, you really have no reason, no one telling you need to look for work. Some people are. I'm not suggesting that, a lot of people aren't out there looking for jobs, but I think we also know that there are employers everywhere you go, everywhere you turn, that have help wanted signs, and they can't find those people. And so we need to find ways to get people off of unemployment, because of course that money's going to run out at some point, and back into the workplace. But you have other factors too, and I don't want to take up a ton of time here, but with the benefits cliff, with people who are on SNAP benefits, or maybe getting childcare subsidies, or they're on Healthy Michigan, Medicaid expansion, or even Medicaid proper, where if they earn too much, they lose these benefits. And, working a few more hours doesn't make up for the loss of those benefits. So there is so many issues layered upon issues, affordable daycare, transportation, access to transportation, affordable housing, like all of those things. And there's so much opportunity here and things that we can work on. Of course, it can't all be legislated. Many of these issues, are deeper than just passing a bill, but we're working on lots of different areas here. So we can get more into that as we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. I'd like to talk next to William Hallen, President and CEO of the Michigan Retailers Association. Bill, retailers across the state have experienced the gamut of impacts due to the pandemic, from becoming frontline workers to having to close down businesses, to pivoting operations, to make products to assist with the pandemic needs. Please tell us about these experiences, the ways your members have had to adapt, and the long-term impact to your members.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Appreciate it. At the outset of the pandemic, retailers can really be broken down into two categories that had very different experiences. I mean, essential retailers that were open and non-essential retailers that wanted to be open. I mean, if you were a grocery store, a hardware store, or a pharmacy, you had your hands full with panic shopping, inventory issues, and implementing state and local regulations seemingly overnight. They were happy to be open, but they were operating at significantly reduced capacity. Non-essential retailers, they just wanted to be able to open up. And, they were willing to implement any and all protocols necessary to keep their employees and their customers safe. After being closed for 60 days in the spring, time was of the essence to get them back open. Fortunately, all retail has been open since early June, but keeping retail operations running smoothly is no cakewalk. Retailers have had to enforce mask regulations, develop curbside and home delivery systems, and build out their e-commerce functionality. Fortunately, retailers are resilient. I think that's what we found during the pandemic. And we conduct a monthly survey report with the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. And for the last 4 months, we've seen retail growth, which has been very positive. But there are certainly challenges ahead, which I think Wendy kind of highlighted, and I'll certainly echo her comments. Hiring employees for retailers continues to be an issue, particularly because of, the additional federal unemployment benefits that folks are receiving. And then inventory issues are also a problem. You've probably seen some stories about, ships waiting to port over in Los Angeles and the backup that we had in the Suez Canal. So, I mean, it's been difficult for retailers when they have a customer that wants to buy an item and they have trouble sourcing and supplying that item due to, down chain supply chain issues.
Right. Bill, the retail industry has stepped up in a huge way during the pandemic. First with being on the front line, supplying us with groceries, and most recently with Meijer and other pharmacies partnering with the state and federal government to administer vaccines. What's it like to know your members are playing such an integral part in providing assistance and hope during this very difficult time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly demonstrates the value of having brick and mortar retailers that are invested in our state. I mean, look, e-commerce is great. It fulfilled a need during the pandemic and it's not going away. But when the going gets tough, we need local retailers that are here that can step up and serve the needs of their community. Retailers provide about 1 million jobs in the state of Michigan, and they pay $27 billion in wages that contribute to our local economy. So when we needed supplies to shelter at home, retailers were there to keep our pantries full. And when we needed COVID testing and vaccine administration, retailers and pharmacies were there to provide a convenient place to get that medical care. These businesses are integral to our communities, and they jumped into action at the outset to be the first to implement safety measures to keep their employees and customers safe. I think prior to the pandemic, many of us probably took for granted the convenience of having our local retailer, whether it's a Meijer, a Walgreens, Kroger, Walmart, whomever, and the convenience of going there. Hopefully now we all have a greater sense of appreciation that when you need toilet paper or something immediately, hand sanitizer, they're there to fulfill that need.
You're right. You're right. Thank you, Bill. Now let's turn to Delaney McKinley, Vice President of Membership Marketing and Events for the Michigan Manufacturing Association. Would be interested in understanding what has been the biggest impact of the pandemic on the manufacturing industry.
Thanks, Terry, and thanks for having me join this great group this morning. The pandemic has been really incredibly difficult on all of us, but I'm really proud to say that we have been, throughout the pandemic, in absolute awe of our members as they adapted in what's really kind of typical form for them. We've seen historically how manufacturers tend to jump into problem-solving mode and really do awe-inspiring and heart-rendering acts for their companies, their workforce, and their communities. It'd be hard for me to narrow it down to just one impact, so I think there are kind of three biggies that I'd like to talk about. The first is workforce disruptions. Manufacturing is largely an in-person endeavor, and so initially what we were dealing with was the initial confusion of determining who's deemed critical infrastructure, who could continue to operate in those initial 8 weeks and who had to shut down. And then we're still seeing some of that disruption today as our members continue to face with childcare issues and virtual schooling issues. And just building on a little bit about what Wendy mentioned earlier, for our office workers in the industry, the current restrictions on in-person office work that continues in what seems to be in perpetuity, it's a huge challenge for us bringing back the full complement of manufacturing workers on site. The second item that was a huge impact is really shifting production and innovation to manufacture new products. Whether that is in demand for changing demand from the typical customers or totally shifting to new products altogether. We saw chemical companies and even breweries and distilleries shifting to making things like hand sanitizer. We saw our automotive manufacturers producing things like ventilators, face masks, and other high demand PPE. Our food manufacturers, similar to what Bill was sharing, they're ramping up production and they're responding to the change in demand, more to residential consumption rather than we're talking about mass and commercial consumption of food through restaurants. And of course, our pharmaceutical and medical products manufacturers, they've rose to meet the demand and fast tracking development and approval of and large scale production of vaccines. So some really huge impacts there, the likes of which we've never seen. And lastly, again, something that we share in common with the retail space, the impact of supply chain disruptions. And what's unique about this is the scope, and it's been far more extensive than perhaps has been ever seen. It's rippling across countries and across industries. Typically, when you see supply chain disruptions, you're looking at one particular industry or maybe a couple countries or a region. But this was absolutely pervasive across all of them.
Right. I certainly agree with you. A lot of similarities. Like Michigan Works, the Michigan Manufacturers Association supports efforts such as apprenticeships, on-the-job training, Michigan Reconnect, Future for Frontliners, and Going Pro Talent Fund to ensure workers get the skills they need to fill the talent gaps that employers across the state might be experiencing. How important are these programs to Michigan's economic recovery post-COVID?
Yeah, we see these as absolutely vital to the strength of the Michigan manufacturing industry in terms of helping to create a robust workforce. And of course, the impact of the manufacturing industry on Michigan's economy is undeniable. So the strength of the manufacturing workforce is critical to the strength of the Michigan economy. So I can tell you that prior to the pandemic, the number one issue for all manufacturers, without exception, is talent. During the pandemic, that's the same, and we'll need to continue addressing this issue well beyond the pandemic. And our manufacturers have been working to respond. They've greatly increased their recruitment, retention, and training programs. So just for an example, in 2019 alone, manufacturing spent at least $26.2 billion nationally on internal and external programs for new and existing employees, according to the Manufacturing Institute. So that's what they're doing on their own. But as a state, we have to do more to upskill our entire workforce. And programs like Going Pro Talent Fund, Michigan Reconnect, Futures for Frontliners, and state support for apprenticeships and on-the-job training, they do precisely that.
Thank you. Thank you. Now let's turn to John Melcher, Chief Operating Officer of Crystal Mountain Resort in Michigan. As you're aware, the hospitality industry has been very hard hit, particularly hard hit by the pandemic. Please tell us about the impact the pandemic has had on Crystal Mountain Resort and what is the long-term impact?
Sure. Well, good morning. And Terry, thanks for having me today. It's always great to share experiences and best practices across industries as we all try to figure out how to operate in this pandemic. And, it's pretty amazing that we've all been dealing with this for a year, but we certainly learned a lot. I know we have. And, from implementing new safety protocols for employees and guests to interacting with our customers differently. And I think back to the tremendous uncertainty that we were all dealing with a year ago with the environment rapidly changing almost hourly. And for us, it was, when could we reopen safely and would our guests be comfortable traveling again? Fun and safety are two of our core values here, and you can't have fun if you don't feel safe. So we quickly formed a safety committee that we refer to as Crystal Clean, and they looked at every aspect of our operations and developed safety protocols to keep everyone safe and also to provide some assurance to guests that, when they're visiting us, they would be safe. But we also, and we do it today, we're very deliberate on reminding folks that this is a shared responsibility. So everyone has to do their part to keep everybody safe and to keep our doors open. And I also note that, we've got a tremendous relationship with our health department, which is the Benzie Legal Non-District Health Department. And they have been tremendous partners helping us navigate this pandemic. And I was actually asked last fall in an interview for the ski industry, what advice would I give to operators that were just starting to open their doors? My advice was to, make sure you have a close relationship with your health department because it's critical, not only for safety, but to continue to operate. But, for us, we're fortunate that, most of what we do revolves around outdoor recreation. And although, we were very challenged with our meeting and conference business, a bright light for us has been the demand for outdoor recreation. And that's both in the summer as well as the winter. And this leisure demand, provided us with a great opportunity to close the gap that was created by not being able to host large conference groups in our conference center. But it's been a challenge meeting that demand. And like most businesses in the state, as we're hearing this morning, finding new employees has been very difficult. And that was the case before the pandemic and even more so today. So programs like the Michigan Reconnect, Going Pro, and the Future for Frontliners are even more important today. As for the long-term impact, I'm very optimistic. I know we'll get back to some level of normalcy, hopefully sooner than later. And while probably not the same normal as before the pandemic, I certainly think it will be better. Even for our meeting and conference business, I do think once the dust settles, there will be demand for in-person conferences and trade shows, but they'll probably be a little bit different, which is fine.
John, I am desperately looking forward to in-person events. So I'm glad to hear you say that. I have another question, and this one I'll pose to you, but also to the entire panel. We're seeing a domino effect on Michigan's economy due to the pandemic. There is an accelerated shift from brick and mortar retail sales to online sales. This depresses business travel, impacting car rentals and auto sales, and we're seeing more businesses planning to continue online meetings post-pandemic, cutting down on the rental of meeting space, not to mention the number of businesses that have decided to give up office space, hurting downtowns and the value of office buildings and impacting property tax revenues. What does all of this mean for the future of Michigan's economy?
In many ways, the pandemic, forced us to move, a little more quickly in adapting, new technologies to service our guests and meet their expectations. And, some examples that we recently deployed include, we've got new RFID technology that's a touchless technology that allows guests to load and reload lift tickets and purchase other things from their phones and walk directly to that area, or chairlift or activity that they might be signing up for. We've also introduced, we call them pickup boxes, but it's almost like an automated ticket dispenser. So get you a lift ticket or any other thing. So that eliminates the need to stand in line. Reduces contact with others and certainly is convenient and safe, but also it certainly is going to continue to be with us into the future. We've also added online to-go ordering systems for our restaurants as well as our retail. So I think a lot of those technologies were critical for operating in the pandemic, but I think they'll continue obviously as we move forward and get this behind us.
I think you're right. Anyone else on the future of Michigan's economy, particularly as it relates to this shift from, retail to online and business travel, and the impact of businesses kind of moving away from having office space?
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think there's still a lot of discussion about, kind of what does this new normal look like, and everyone has a slightly different opinion. But I think we can probably all agree that things like remote work, or at least remote work to some extent, more flexibility in terms of hours, artificial intelligence, and more automation is probably here to stay. All of those things, of course, have been accelerated during the pandemic. And so, the trajectory of these things are probably forever change. I think, the big question is to what extent. We probably will find ourselves in like some sort of hybrid COVID normal, new normal, as we move forward. I'm not sure what we'll call that. I'm sure at some point we'll find out. But I think there's just a lot of questions about that. And, a lot of people kind of looking to other businesses to say, well, what are you doing? And looking for those best practices. And I think a lot of our associations here are working to try to help people and give them forums to understand, what their peer groups are doing. So, I think a lot of this is kind of to be continued. It's hard to kind of look into that crystal ball. It's hard to even think like back in March of last year, if like we couldn't have even imagined where we would be today. So with vaccines, with hopefully herd immunity, I think we're hopeful that at some point we're sooner rather than later, we're going to move into this new normal, but still a lot of question marks about all the details.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, and I can follow up on that with a slightly different perspective too, outside of the technology aspect. I think it means that we need to recognize the value of Michigan businesses and put Michigan first through our actions at all levels, whether that's through consumer habits or business-to-business transactions or government regulations. And, a couple examples that we have for Michigan retailers is that, over the holidays, we had a Shop 3 initiative, which encouraged Michigan consumers to redirect one purchase that they otherwise may have made online to a local Michigan store. 3 seemed like a reasonable number for Michigan consumers to undertake. So that was one way to impact the consumer aspect. On the business side, we found a local distiller and purchased thousands of bottles of hand sanitizer and shipped those out to our members throughout the state. So really working with other Michigan-based companies. And then, for government, it's important for government to continue to make Michigan a business-friendly place. The COVID risk is never going to be zero. So we have to understand what a reasonable amount of risk is. It's probably going to be an endemic where we have, certain pockets of COVID existing for a period of time here. So we need a reasonable approach for business regulation. And like we've talked about a little bit, getting offices reopened is important. Long-term remote work is not sustainable for collaboration. Another great example of creative government thought is when they've opened up downtowns for outdoor seating and developed these flexible approaches, recognizing that we're operating in this difficult environment, but how can we keep the economy moving going forward?
Thanks, Bill. So I've got another question for the entire panel. We've talked a lot this morning about many different issues that exist with regard to employers as a result of the pandemic. How can we move forward, working together as partners, as you said, Bill, to impact policy in Michigan to assist employers?
Sure, I'd be happy to start that one, Terry. I think having a partnership is really important, not only across industries, as we're all discussing here, with partners such as Michigan Works agencies and also with the state. We all need to work together towards the same goal. We need to make sure that the regulatory barriers are not inadvertently restricting our recovery from the pandemic. And that's sort of what we're seeing in some instances. Talking about the permanent MIOSHA rules, that's of concern. Looking at different things that employers are contending with, such as unemployment taxes, making sure that our unemployment trust fund is stable enough and supported, perhaps through state dollars, to make sure that we're not further exacerbating the tax burdens on our manufacturers and our broader business community. Helping employers with these talent issues, making sure that there is sufficient funding, sufficient administrative support for things like we've all mentioned before, going pro talent fund, Michigan Reconnect, Futures for Frontliners, things like apprenticeships and on-the-job training. We all need to have our eye on the prize. I'm very confident about the future of our recovery and of our state. It's amazing to see what's been done despite all of these challenges. We're still here. We're still, we're growing. We're doing great things. And if we can get past all of the disruption that we've had, I know that our industry is certainly like a pipeline, and I'm sure that's true of many other industries as well. Shutting it off abruptly, it's not going to get things flowing immediately. So we're still seeing a lot of fits and spurts with supply chain, with workforce, with all of these other things. But once we get that flowing, we all need to be working in the same direction, and state government and all of our partners need to be supporting that effort to get us towards that ultimate end game, which is to be the most competitive state in the nation.
Yeah, I'll kind of jump in on that. I think Delaney made some really good points there. And, Michigan has a tremendous opportunity in front of itself in terms of the $5 billion that's coming down from the federal government that was allocated by Congress to make some strategic investments and to address some of these pain points that employers and employees are both facing. Going back to the pandemic and up until now, the state has been offering a lot of grant programs for struggling businesses. And that's been great relief for those that have been lucky enough to get one of those grants. But I can't tell you how many members we've heard from who said, I've applied for every grant on the books and I haven't gotten a single one, and my neighbor or the guy down the street has gotten 10. And so in terms of help and support, it's been very unequal. And so moving forward, we at the Michigan Chamber, and I know others in the business community as well, are advocating for more broad-based relief for those that continue to be closed or have severe restrictions on them, to make sure that there aren't winners and losers with these grant applications. But in terms of this money coming down from Congress and, how the legislature and the governor can agree to spend it, we are arguing or advocating that it not be spent on things that create legacy costs, but that it be used strategically for one-time investments to address some of the pain points that we as a state have and that employers and employees are facing. So, number one, a big investment in our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our underground. So like our water, our sewer, that is going to be a smart use of that money. But also to address things like affordable childcare and access to that, because we know that's a barrier to many women, but also men in terms of entering the workforce and affording childcare when the wage isn't extremely high. Affordable housing, as we mentioned earlier, is another issue. And there's just been a new coalition formed on that we're part of and others are as well, kind of trying to break down the barriers there. And as Delaney mentioned, the Reconnect program, the Futures for Frontliners program, the Going Pro program, which really helps employers directly with their talent needs. All of those things need to continue to be invested in by the state. And, last but not least is our Pure Michigan campaign and the fact that we need to get back to a situation where our own residents of our state and residents of other states are traveling, to other regions and investing their money and spending their money in those local economies, because many of our states' local economies are dependent on these tourisms and making sure that people know that they're open for business and that they are a great place to be and to play in all seasons. So there's lots of opportunities here, I think, for the legislature to be involved, for the governor to be involved in that. We should all be kind of rallying around these points, because that is really what's going to move Michigan forward, in addition to getting people reattached to the workforce long term and kind of moving past relying on government to get them over this hump and back towards self-sufficiency.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think one of the I guess the positive things of this whole crisis, if you can find anything in it, is that I think it did bring all our industries together. So we were able to, focus on the challenges that were common across every business. I think back to last year at the start of this thing, we're all trying to figure it out. Wendy and her team were doing webinar after webinar, with people representing all sorts of industries on the call, just trying to figure out how we're going to, get forward and figure out a way to operate through this environment. So I think we need to continue to do that, because I think we've made some strides, and obviously there are things that are applicable to all of us, and working together we can resolve those.
Thanks, John. Well, I'd like to thank all of our panel members for the great discussion so far today. Do any of you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share? We've had a really good discussion.
Thanks for the opportunity. I think what's really come out to me across all of the comments that have been made by all the panelists is the remarkable similarity. I think in a lot of ways that there is more togetherness in our world than some of us may see. So I'm encouraged by that, and I hope we can continue working towards that collective goal that we all seem to have.
I'm encouraged as well. I think there's a ton of opportunity. You guys have outlined a lot of great thoughts here. I would like to thank our panel members for their time and for sharing their stories and knowledge and thoughts with us today. I found this to be very informative and engaging, and I hope that all of you did as well. The next panel discussion as part of Workforce Advocacy Month will take place on Friday, April 30th at 11 a.m. and will focus on the state budget. More information about this panel discussion can be found on the association's website at michiganworks.org. And that will end our panel discussion for today. Thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.